Hi, I'm Laura, and I'm 29 years old. I lost my parents in a car crash when I was very young. They didn't have any relatives to take care of me, so I ended up in an orphanage. I stayed there for about 5 years until I was adopted by a couple who turned out to be billionaires. Life became pretty amazing after that. They didn't make a big deal about the adoption and kept it private because they didn't want any attention for it. When I grew up and moved out on my own, my adoptive parents decided to expand their business and traveled around Europe for new opportunities. Around that time, I met Larry, my ex-husband. We met in college and hit it off right away. Larry was cheerful and kind, and I quickly fell for him. Our dates turned into a serious relationship, and we were the perfect couple, except for one issue. Larry's family didn't like me. I met his parents after we graduated college. Larry wanted us both to be settled in good jobs before introducing me. He also warned me that his parents could be pretty judgmental about who their kids dated, so he wanted me to make a good impression. I was nervous, but I tried my best. By the time I met them, Larry and I had been dating for 6 years and were already engaged. I figured that might be a problem since they didn't know me as his girlfriend first. I remember freaking out with Larry the day before we were supposed to meet his parents. "They're going to hate me, Larry's," I said. "They won't, I promise," Larry reassured me. "Don't you think they'll be shocked when they find out we're engaged?" "Well, yeah, but I don't think it'll be a big deal." "Are you serious?" "You were nervous about introducing me to them because they're so judgmental, and now you think telling them I'm your fiancé won't make it worse?" "Look," he said, "even if they do judge, does it really matter? It won't change how I feel. It won't matter to you, but I'm not so sure. You always seem so cautious when it comes to them." "I promise, Laura, it won't affect me or us." "Okay, if you say so. But maybe we shouldn't tell them we're engaged just yet. What if we wait a month or so before breaking the news?" "If that makes you feel better, we can do that. It's totally up to you." "Yeah, let's wait. I'll do anything to get on their good side." "You don't need to worry," Larry said. "I'll be there with you no matter what." "Thanks, Larry." I was still nervous, though. The reason I was so freaked out was because every time I brought up meeting his parents, Larry would get anxious and say they wouldn't approve of me. By then, I started to understand why. Larry's family was very wealthy and loved to live extravagantly. They expected their kids to date people who were just as rich, or even richer. At that time, my lifestyle didn't come close to their standards. I hadn't told Larry much about my family because I didn't think it mattered. By the time I realized why Larry was so hesitant about me meeting them, I felt it was even less necessary to share details about my background, especially about my adoptive parents' wealth. I wanted them to like me for who I was, not for my money. Looking back, I see how naive I was. We decided to meet Larry's parents at a fancy restaurant. As we walked in, Larry held my hand. I wore my engagement ring on a necklace instead of my finger, just in case. I wanted to keep my engagement ring with me, but didn't want to draw attention to it, so I wore it on a necklace. When we got to the restaurant, Larry's parents were already sitting at the table. They looked upset right away. Larry had warned me they were very strict about punctuality, and we were only 5 minutes late. Still, it felt like we were already off to a bad start. As soon as we sat down, his parents gave me a quick look, and I could see the disapproval on their faces. They didn't hide it at all. Then they completely ignored me, focusing only on Larry and talking to him as if I wasn't there. I felt so small. The longer they went on without acknowledging me, the more I wanted to leave. I kept my head down, trying not to draw attention to myself. Finally, Larry spoke up. "Mom, Dad, you can't just keep ignoring Laura. She's my amazing girlfriend." His parents turned to me, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, hello," his mom said with a cold tone. "It's nice to meet you." "Hi," I replied politely, trying to stay calm. His mom gave a faint smirk. "I wish I could say the same."
Mom.
Larry snapped. "What?" she said with a shrug. "I'm just being honest." His dad jumped in. "So, Laura, I hear you and Larry met in college. Is that right?" "Yes," I said with a smile. "We shared some classes." "And how exactly did you manage to attend that college?" his dad asked, his tone sharp. "From what I understand, the tuition there isn't cheap, and it's not easy to get in. Larry was furious. Dad, that's enough. Larry, his mom said sternly, don't talk to your father that way. It's a fair question. Laura, please answer. I swallowed hard and tried to keep my composure. I got a full scholarship, I explained. I'm really thankful I had the opportunity to go there. Not only did I learn so much, but I also got to meet Larry, which has been one of the best things to ever happen to me. His dad chuckled, clearly mocking me. Of course, it's one of the best things. Larry's wealthy, and you need that kind of money in your life. At least you're smart enough to realize that. Because, honestly, you're not exactly stunning to look at. I froze. My heart sank. Did he really just say that to my face? Larry slammed his hands on the table. That's enough. We're leaving. Come on, Laura. He grabbed my hand and led me out of the restaurant. I was in shock. I couldn't believe anyone could be so cruel, so openly mean. The car ride home was completely silent. Larry was furious, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I didn't know what to say or how to process what had just happened. When we got home, Larry immediately turned to me. Are you okay? He asked, concern all over his face. I wanted to answer, but the truth was I didn't know how I felt. I was too stunned to even cry. All I could do was sit there, trying to make sense of how people could be so openly hateful. It was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I made sure to dress nicely and behave politely when we met Larry's parents that day. I didn't even order anything expensive at lunch, hoping to leave a good impression. But before I could say much, Emma and George, Larry's parents, had already made up their minds about me. Their disapproval was written all over their faces. Larry was furious about how they treated me, and after we walked out, he refused to speak to them for a while. Later, they texted him, accusing us of being disrespectful for leaving during lunch. Larry ignored their messages. About a month later, he sent them a short text letting them know we were engaged. They weren't happy, of course, but Larry firmly warned them that if they said or did anything against me, he would cut off all contact with them. In an attempt to regain control, Emma and George offered to pay for our wedding, but only if they got to plan everything. Naturally, Larry and I rejected that idea. Instead, we decided to elope. My parents were supportive and happy for us, even though they were in Europe at the time and couldn't be there in person. They sent us a gift, a beautiful, expensive painting. Larry raised an eyebrow at how extravagant it was, but I assured him it was just how they were. After we got married, the next time we saw Emma and George was at an anniversary party they hosted. Despite their clear dislike for me, I was genuinely happy they had invited us. I thought it might be a chance to mend things. When we arrived, though, the evening turned into a nightmare. It wasn't just Emma and George ignoring me this time. It was nearly everyone at the party. I stayed by Larry's side, hoping to avoid awkward situations, but even that didn't help. Whenever I tried to join a conversation, people would either glance at me and walk away or completely ignore me and keep talking to Larry. I felt invisible. By the end of the night, I was holding back tears, humiliated and hurt by how cold everyone had been. As the party was wrapping up, Emma and George were asked to give a speech. By then, I was exhausted and just wanted to leave, but I stayed out of respect. Their speech started with them thanking everyone in the room for being an important part of their lives. It was clear I wasn't included in that everyone. They kept making subtle but pointed comments about me throughout the speech, and the guests laughed along. Each remark felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't take it anymore. Quietly, I got up, walked out of the venue, and ordered an Uber to take me home. When I got home, I broke down. I was heartbroken and disgusted by how they had treated me, not just Emma and George, but the entire group. It was clear I wasn't welcome in their world, no matter how hard I tried to be respectful and kind. I cried the entire way home and didn't stop even after I got there. When Larry arrived, he looked upset and angry. "Why did you walk out like that?" he demanded. "Do you know how embarrassing that was for me?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, stunned. "Don't play dumb with me, Laura. I had to sit there while my parents yelled at me, and the guests pitied me for being with you. Are you serious right now? What about how embarrassing it was for me?" Come on, Laura, he snapped. You could have just dealt with it for one night. It was my parents' anniversary, for God's sake. I was ignored by everyone, Larry. Your parents even made fun of me in their speech. How do you expect me to be okay with that? I'm not saying they were right, he said, raising his voice. But you could have stayed. I would have talked to them afterward. And what would that have done for me? I asked. Do you have any idea what it feels like to sit there while everyone laughs at you? You've never been in that position, so it's easy for you to say it's no big deal. My parents expect an apology, Larry said coldly. And I want one too. I stared at him in disbelief. I'm not apologizing. Not unless they apologize to me first. Larry shook his head. They won't apologize. And I see no reason for you to refuse. I've always stood up for you, Laura. Why is this any different? This is different because your parents humiliated me in front of everyone. And now you're acting like I'm the problem. You're supposed to have my back. Well, maybe my parents were right about you, he said bitterly, and with that, he walked off to sleep in the guest bedroom. I sat there, stunned. Larry had always stood up for me before. This sudden change in him hurt deeply. He knew how much his parents' behavior affected me, and the fact that I walked out should have shown him how bad I was. But instead of caring about my feelings, he seemed more worried about his parents and their guests. The next week was cold and silent. Larry refused to talk to me, and his parents bombarded me with texts, calling me ungrateful and an embarrassment. I tried to reach out to Larry to explain how I felt, but he wouldn't listen. Eventually, I gave in. I apologized to both Larry and his parents, even though it felt humiliating. I did it because I loved Larry and didn't want this to ruin our relationship. But things only got worse after that. Larry's parents were tired and began hosting weekly family dinners. Larry insisted we attend. The first time we went, I hoped it might be an opportunity to mend things. But as soon as we arrived at their house, the coldness and judgment started again. I felt like an outsider in every sense. Larry's parents barely acknowledged me, and the other family members followed their lead. I spent the evening trying to make polite conversation, but no one seemed interested in including me. By the end of the night, I felt small, invisible, and completely drained. This cycle became our new normal. Every week, Larry brought me to these dinners, and every week I left feeling humiliated and hurt. Larry seemed to turn a blind eye to it all, brushing off my concerns and telling me to let it go. It was clear that no matter how much I loved him, I was the only one fighting for us. When I walked into the house, I immediately felt the tension in the air. The atmosphere turned awkward. Emma was still upstairs getting ready, so she didn't notice me at first, but George and Larry's siblings shot me uncomfortable glances. Nobody spoke to me. Larry, meanwhile, left me standing alone while he mingled with his family. I tried to stay calm, even though I felt like I didn't belong. When Emma finally came downstairs and saw me, her reaction was explosive. She stormed toward me, her face filled with anger. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "Excuse me?" I said, caught off guard. "No, I will not excuse you," she snapped. "What are you doing in my house right now?" "Well," I replied, trying to stay composed, "you invited us for dinner."
Wrong.
"I invited Larry. This is a family dinner. I'm Larry's wife," I said firmly. "That makes me part of this family, doesn't it?" "Absolutely not," she spat. "An orphan like you has no place in this family." I blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about? Did you think you could hide that from us?" she continued. "We do background checks on anyone who marries into this family. You're not even close to being in my son's league." I felt my blood boil. What does my background have to do with this? That can't be the only thing that matters. "You're ugly, poor, and utterly unfit for our elite circles," Emma said coldly. "Why are you being so shallow?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Are you really that afraid I'll ruin your reputation? Doesn't the fact that I make your son happy mean anything to you?" She smirked. "If happiness could pay the bills, everyone would be rich. You'll never belong with us." I tried to keep my composure. "Maybe I'll never fit in with people like you," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But at least I value people for who they are, not for their wealth or status. You've never even taken the time to know me, Yet you've judged me from the start? Emma's eyes narrowed. Laura, that's enough. Before I could respond, Larry suddenly stepped forward. I looked at him, expecting him to defend me, like he always had before. But what he did next crushed me. He pulled some cash out of his wallet, handed it to me, and said, "Here, take this money, get an Uber, and leave." I stared at him in shock. Larry, are you serious? He didn't even meet my eyes. Just go, he said coldly, turning back toward his mother. Emma smirked triumphantly as if she'd just won a battle. My heart felt like it was shattering. Tears filled my eyes as I turned and left the house. In the Uber, I couldn't stop crying. Larry had never treated me like this before. He had always stood up for me, always been my safe place when his parents belittled me. But now it felt like he was siding with them. Was he trying to win their approval after the incident at the party? Whatever his reasons, his actions hurt me deeply. I replayed everything in my mind, wondering if I'd said something wrong, but I couldn't see it. I had only stood up for myself, and I had done so calmly and respectfully. Still, it didn't matter. Larry's parents had used my past as a weapon to tear me down, and instead of standing by my side, Larry had let them. Worse, he had defended them. I wanted to scream, to yell, to make him understand how much he'd hurt me. But I knew that if I lost my temper, I'd only confirm all the negative things his family thought about me. So, I stayed silent and walked away, trying to gather what little dignity I had left. That night, I lay awake, questioning everything. How had Larry changed so much? How could he let his family treat me this way? And most of all, how could I move forward when the person I loved most had let me down so completely? After Larry came back home that night, he went right back to not speaking to me. My heart was breaking, and I felt so alone. I knew he expected me to apologize again, but I just couldn't do it, not this time. Emma had insulted me in the worst way possible, and Larry was angry at me for it. If anything, I felt I deserved an apology from him. For the next 3 weeks, we didn't speak to each other. It was unbearable at first, but I slowly got used to the silence. Larry still went to his family's weekly dinners, leaving me alone at home. Surprisingly, I didn't mind being alone. The quiet gave me time to think, though it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. One evening, while Larry was at another family dinner, my parents video called me. Seeing their faces felt like a lifeline. "Hey, honey," my mom greeted me cheerfully. "Hi, sweetie. How's everything going?" my dad chimed in.
Hi, Mom.
"Hi, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Things aren't great." Their smiles dropped. "What's wrong, sweetie?" my mom asked, her voice full of concern. "If you need help with anything, just say the word." "I don't think this is something you can help with," I admitted, "but I appreciate it." "Where's Larry's?" Dad asked. "Isn't he helping?" "That's the thing," I said, hesitating for a moment. "He's part of the problem." "Ha, sweetie," Mom said, narrowing her eyes. "Could you explain what's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Well, his parents are very wealthy, and they're also really snobby." "Oh, I hate people like that," Dad said immediately. "Tell me about it," I sighed. "They think I'm just some poor girl who doesn't belong in their world. Every time I see them, they make it their mission to humiliate me." "What the hell?" Mom snapped, her protective instincts kicking in. "Yeah," I continued. "And the last time I went over, Larry's mom called me an orphan, as an insult." Mom's eyes widened, and her face turned red with anger. "That woman. I'll claw her face off. How dare she call my precious child an orphan? Do they even know about us?" "No, they don't," I admitted. "I didn't tell them about you guys because I didn't want their opinion of me to change. I wanted them to like me for who I am, not because of my family's wealth." But it backfired. "And as for Larry," I paused, my voice breaking slightly, "he's been siding with them. He thinks I was disrespectful for standing up for myself." My dad leaned closer to the screen, his expression serious. "Sweetie, are you sure this is the man you want to spend your life with?" Tears welled up in my eyes. "I love him, Dad. I really do. But this isn't how I imagined things would be. We haven't spoken in 3 weeks, and honestly, I've been okay with that." Mom reached out, as if trying to comfort me through the screen. All right, sweetie, she said softly. Your dad and I are coming to visit next week.
What?
I asked, surprised. Why? We wanted to take you and Larry on a vacation, Dad said. But now we're thinking we'll just take you instead. Mom smiled mischievously. And don't worry about us not being able to help. I think we might even have a way to get you a little sweet revenge. Revenge? I asked, blinking. What do you mean? You'll see, Mom said, her smile widening. We've got some plans. Trust us, sweetheart. Everything will be fine. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Whatever my parents had in mind, I knew they had my back, and that alone gave me the strength to keep going. I couldn't believe it. I was so excited to finally see my parents again. It had been way too long, and just the thought of being with them lifted my spirits. For the first time in ages, I felt genuinely happy. We kept talking for a while, catching up, and eventually, Dad explained his plan to help me. At one point, he asked me where Larry's family dinners were usually held. I told him they alternated between hosting at their house and going out to restaurants. Luckily, the week my parents were arriving, the dinner was going to be at a restaurant. I just needed to figure out exactly where so I could pass the information along to my parents. Since I still had Larry's email logged in on my phone, it didn't take long to find what I needed. Emma and George had a habit of emailing everyone about everything, so I easily located the dinner's venue and shared it with my parents. Around the same time, my mom's lawyer friend reached out, and we started the process of filing for divorce. It felt like a huge step, but I knew it was the right one. A few days later, my parents arrived in town. I met them at their hotel, and we had a wonderful lunch together. They insisted on treating me to a relaxing spa day afterward, saying I deserved it. While I enjoyed my time at the spa, they prepared for what they called a little justice with Larry's parents. That evening, my parents walked into the restaurant where Larry and his family were having their weekly dinner. According to Dad, as soon as they approached the table, George and Emma recognized him and began whispering to each other, clearly surprised. My mom later told me how the conversation went. Dad, hello. Oh, wow, George and Emma. What a coincidence to see some familiar faces. Emma nervously, familiar faces? Who exactly are you talking about, Mr. Edwards? Dad, well, I see Larry here. Hi, Larry. And of course, I came to find my daughter. George, confused, your daughter? I think you must be mistaken. She's not here.
Dad, really?
That's strange. Laura is married to Larry, isn't she? Emma, wait, you're saying Laura is your daughter? Dad, of course. My wife and I adopted her years ago. We're her parents. George, stammering, excuse me? You're her dad's? Dad, yes, that's right. Laura's mentioned there have been some issues with her in-laws. Now that I'm here, I see what the problem is. It's you. Emma, defensive, no. She's the one who hid this from us. If we had known about her background, we would have treated her better. Mom, she didn't want your kindness to depend on her background. She wanted you to value her for who she is, not for where she comes from. Hearing about this confrontation gave me a mix of emotions, satisfaction, pride, and even a little sadness. My parents had stood up for me in a way that Larry never had. It was bittersweet, but it was also a reminder that I wasn't alone. I had people in my corner, people who genuinely loved me and wanted the best for me. That was the kind of family I needed, not one that judged me for things I couldn't control. Oh, and she asked me to give this to Larry, my dad said calmly, handing him the divorce papers. Without another word, Dad turned and walked out. What followed was a whirlwind. It only took a few phone calls for many of George's business investors to pull out. Their empire began to crumble almost overnight, and watching it happen felt like a poetic kind of justice. The same people who had looked down on me and made fun of others for not being as wealthy were now dealing with the fallout of their own arrogance. As George and Emma's business took a nosedive, I started receiving messages from Larry's family. Some were nasty and full of insults, calling me horrible names, while others begged me to talk to my dad and reverse what had been done. I ignored them all. Their behavior had made it clear that they never respected me, and I wasn't about to fix their problems for them. Larry, to his credit, signed the divorce papers without any trouble. It was a relief not to have to fight that battle. After everything was finalized, my parents and I decided to take a long vacation. It was exactly what I needed, a chance to escape, relax, and start healing. That trip turned out to be one of the best experiences of my life. I laughed, explored new places, and felt lighter than I had in years. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. Yes, it hurt to lose someone I had once believed was the love of my life. But the experience also taught me something invaluable: how important it is to stand up for myself and never let anyone make me feel small. I'm endlessly grateful to my parents for their love and support. They showed me what real family looks like, people who stand by you no matter what. As I move forward, I'm excited to see what life has in store for me. Whatever comes next, I know I'm stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace it.